Right. After the Berlin tragedy, I kind of left it a few weeks before I gave my opinion on the situation, to allow a percentage of the dust to settle. We've had another shocking attack in London yesterday, which appears to be a terrorist incident. I have some concerns over the authorities' lack of desire to release information. I think what is most tragic is the fact that 3 innocent lives were taken yesterday. For the sake of what? It would certainly appear that this was Islamically motivated. I think, you know, we've got to be honest, and we've got to have this discussion in this country. We've got to have this discussion in the wider context of Europe. That extreme Islam is a substantive problem. I think it's also important to point out, because I certainly saw very early on yesterday, with regards, you know, Twitter and various other social media platforms, that straight away wanted to jump onto the immigration bandwagon, which, you know, potentially this highlights the agenda of those who were immediately raising that as the most significant aspect, and it's not. We have an Islamic problem globally. I don't think, you know, that's specifically, we should or can target it to any specific area. We have a global Islamic problem. One of my very, very good friends, I'm in fact godfather to 2 of his daughters, is a Muslim. He comes from quite a traditional Muslim family, but I had a conversation with him not too long ago where he said, I don't think it's right for me to impose my faith as a Muslim on my children. And I said, why? What? And if that's your family's belief, then surely you offer it in a way that allows them to at least make their own choices. And he said, you know what, Drew, the problem is, I think Islam is broken. He said, and what I'm most fearful of, he says, when Christians misinterpret the Bible, they just look foolish. When Muslims misinterpret the Quran, people die. And I thought that was an incredibly powerful statement for a Muslim man of similar age to me to say, that he didn't feel that he could practice his faith with his children any longer because of his fears for the problems within his community. And this is a wider context, this is a wider issue, that particularly in the UK we seem to be terrified of having the debate. We've seen recently with the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs that targeted places like Rotherham and Bristol and Luton, and apparently, if certain intelligence is to be believed, that this is an epidemic problem in the vast majority of cities. The fact that police forces and councils and social services were frightened to challenge because of the potential backlash from those communities. And I do understand that. I genuinely do understand that. However, when does race and diversity become more important than rape? When does race and diversity come before public safety? And I know that the argument will be what happened in London yesterday is a very, very... It's a difficult thing to legislate and police. I understand that. You know, if an individual has an axe to grind, regardless of how that is and what mechanism they use to verbalise that, is very difficult to legislate and police against, like I say. However, I don't think it stops us from having the debate that we have a problem that we need to tackle. And there's a statement that's doing the rounds. It's been doing the rounds for a while, which basically says that, you know, not every Muslim is a terrorist, but it appears every terrorist act is committed by a Muslim. And there's an element of that that makes me feel that that's a bit of a sweeping generalisation. However, if we look at terrorist incidents over the last 10 years, the last 15 years, the vast majority will be Islamically motivated. And the problem is, and you have individuals like Sadiq Khan who, without, you know, I say without realising it, he should realise it, particularly from the background that he comes from. And I know that Mr. Khan, our London mayor, does have this consistent habit of putting his size 10 well and truly between his teeth. There is an element of what he says has an element of truth to it. You know, if we live in big cities, this is something that, I think the better way to put it would have been that this risk is ever there. You know, if we live in big cities, I don't think it was the way that he placed it of, you know, we have to accept it, you know, this blasé attitude. I don't think we do, but I think if we live in big cities, no matter where that may be, whether it be London, whether it be Nottingham, whether it be Manchester, your risk of being involved in some form of violent crime will, you know, drastically increase. You know, I think we understand that, but I do think it's time that we have an honest and open debate about how we can come together as a community, as communities, to live together side by side as individuals and as wider communities as a whole. Because if we don't, you know, I think the division will grow. And you know, I've lived in Leicester. I don't live too far from Leicester now. I still live in Leicestershire. It's a wonderfully and beautifully diverse city, which has such a strong cultural weave across all nationalities. You know, there used to be the, and I don't know whether they still do it, there used to be the carnival, the West Indian Carnival in Vicky Park, and you have Diwali on Melton Road, and you know, the communities used to come together. This is happening less and less, and part of that is you know, we've seen this very much in Charnwood, for example, you know, and it's certainly becoming the case in Leicester City that the councils are housing nationalities in specific areas, so creating these kind of like little zones. You know, the Somalians are in one area, you know, the Polish are in another area, the Pakistanis are in another area, the Indians are in another area, and I understand the process of allowing groups of nationalities to have their own communities, their own spheres that they can live within. But at the end of the day, a kickback of this is the fact that we are isolating communities. I have no idea what the answer is. I wish I could be clever enough to come up with a solution. But I think the starting point is that we have to be having this discussion on a national level. I think bringing communities together sounds very easy. I know it isn't. I know it isn't. But we can't allow these fundamentalist morons to win and change our way of life. And I think if anybody who went to London, for example, prior to the 2005 bombings, will see a substantive difference to the way that London is today. You know, security is very different. We see more and more armed police on the streets of our capital, and no doubt this will have another knock-on effect to increasing security, which, you know, who wins and loses in that situation, you know. I can remember when you used to be able to walk freely around the House of Parliament. You can't do that anymore. So every time we ramp up security, you know, we allow these terrorist morons to slowly shift our way of life, our freedoms. I have a lot of issue with internet security and privacy and the way that we are consistently spied upon. And it does make me think, you know, that all of this chatter that goes across on things like Twitter and Facebook and all of this systematic surveillance that we're all placed under doesn't appear to actually prevent that much terrorism. So again, it kind of, for me, reinforces that there's maybe another agenda here, and that actually the surveillance is very little to do with preventing terrorism, because that's the one thing it doesn't appear to do. I think the best way, you know, obviously as a nation our thoughts and prayers go out to the 3 victims. I also think that the perpetrator of this dreadful incident who died, you know, he's still somebody's son. He's still going to have family who may not agree at all with his ideology. And they will be suffering. And I think, you know, we need to spare a few prayers for them as well. You know, this won't be the last time that, as a nation, we have this situation. It will happen again if we can't find a way to come together and to attempt to fix the problems. Which I think, as we as a nation, you know, what we did in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, what's currently going on in Syria, you know, the foreign policy of Western nations has done nothing but to exacerbate this problem quite substantively. And I think that's another aspect that as a nation we have to take a certain level of responsibility for. Does it make these acts of violence, of terrorism, acceptable? No, of course it doesn't. There will never, ever be justification for taking an innocent life. You know? But the flip side of that is the fact that as a nation we have allowed divisions to be made worse by poor foreign policy at the end of the day. Anyway, that's just my views. Please feel free to to challenge it if you so desire. That's the beautiful thing about living in a democracy. We can all have an opinion, but we don't have to agree with each other. And no doubt, you know, I've spent time in London, I've lived in London. I know that this act, as tragic as it may feel right now, you know, won't change the people of London. It won't change the way that London conducts itself. You know, that's the beautiful thing about London, about this country actually, is that we always have a way of dealing with tragedy and coming back. I'm not going to say cliched, stronger than before and all that kind of crap, but you know, we deal with it, we move on. But I do think that we have to now start looking at a way to solving this problem. Take care, folks.